Hi kids, let's get ready for our second test, Unit 2, which is chapters 3 and 4. Okay, first topic of the day is slavery. So why do we need slavery in the colonies? Well, one of the main reasons is there's a lack of indentured servants, right? There's a lack of labor, but there's a big supply of slave labor, and now the cost of slaves has gone down, so they're affordable. And also remember, our indentured servants have proven to be a little risky with Bacon's rebellion, right? They can rebel up and they have rights. Okay, so now that we start to turn towards African slaves, we're going to see the imports of slaves go up, especially in the South where they're needed for labor-intensive crops. Now, how are we going to justify enslaving people? Well, Americans quickly take on the Barbados slave code, which is a really harsh slave code, but it says that slaves are property, they're chattel, and chattel means property. And so they start convincing themselves that, well, Africans are not human beings, they're property. So therefore, it's okay. And so they tell themselves, whatever they need to hear to make themselves feel better. Okay, so now we have slavery, and we're using that Barbados slave code coming from the island of Barbados, and that's actually going to move to South Carolina first. And South Carolina is going to start importing slaves the most, kind of before some of the other colonies, because it's really labor intensive to grow rice down there, right? It takes a lot of work and a lot of labor. Okay, so now, do slaves resist in any way? Well, there's a lot of different ways that slaves will resist. Anything from work slowdown to breaking tools to faking an injury to rebellions. Most of those, you might get a little accommodation, but most of that is not going to, earn slaves their freedom. But we will see over time slaves will develop kind of a distinctive culture. They will adapt and change, create their own language, mixing some African words with, the New English language, combining tribal religion with Christianity, and developing within themselves this kind of unique slave culture. And that's one way that they can kind of have some kind of identity and maybe just a tiny bit of autonomy. Okay, the big slave rebellion that we want to talk about is the Stono Rebellion, and that's the first slave rebellion in the United States. And it happens early on. The slaves rise up, they kill the master and his whole family, and their idea is to march down to Florida. Now, they're originally in South Carolina. They march along the Stono River, and they're going to go to Florida because Florida has promised not to return runaway slaves to the British colonies. However, they don't make it. They get caught and hung, thus showing the price for rebellion is death. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic, the Atlantic system. So the Atlantic system is really a trade system between the Old World and the New World. So between the Americas, Europe, and Africa. And so this is the global exchange, whether trade, labor, ideas, and anything you can think of is called the Atlantic system. That trade between, across the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, you might have heard it called the triangle trade, right, where there's that specific kind of shape where you get slaves from Africa will be taken to the United States, and then the United States will send lumber and fish and rum and sugar to England, and England will turn that into manufactured goods that they'll send to Africa and trade in that way. Something to know about the triangle trade is that our New England colonies, our northernmost colonies, will be big shippers and merchants and make a lot of money off that triangle trade. Okay, this is kind of part of a greater economic system called mercantilism. And mercantilism is where the European countries realize they need colonies, and they need a colony to exploit it for its resources, its labor, and then also have this captive audience to buy their products. So with mercantilism, the colonies provided those resources, lumber, fish, iron, whatever you can think of. They would send that to Britain, and then Britain would turn it into manufactured goods that the colonies would have to buy. Under mercantilism, the colonies are only supposed to purchase things from Britain and only trade with Britain. Okay, but we know the colonies are kind of do their own thing. So the colonies will trade with whoever they want. They'll trade with the French West Indies, the Spanish West Indies, the Dutch, the Germans, whoever they can get better prices for or prices with. And so this is part of salutary neglect. So Britain kind of had this tradition of salutary neglect or beneficial neglect, where they didn't really watch the colonies very much. They didn't really control them too much or their trade. They were making a lot of money off the colonies and just kind of left them alone. And so this is where the colonies will defy some of that mercantilism and trade with who they want. Now, the British from time to time do start to realize what they're doing and that they're not strictly trading with Britain. So they will pass the Navigation Acts, and the Navigation Acts say that you can only trade with Britain, that goods can only be carried on American ships or British ships. 70% of the sailors on American ships have to be British sailors, right, to kind of guarantee that we're not smuggling, and different laws like that. Okay, again, it only works when it's monitored. We're still going to smuggle and trade with whoever we want. Okay, now part of our trading is due to the lack of money supply. There's not enough coinage, not enough coins or British dollars, they're in the Americas. They're not really sending that money over. They're trying to trade with these bills of exchange, right, that are good for other merchandise, but not pure money, right? We need those actual coins so we can go buy whatever we want. So the colonies are having to do a lot of trading, having to make products in their home and trade just to get the things that they want. And they're bartering rather than paying with real money. And so that's actually going to become an issue, and the colonies will create their own banks and try to create their own money, and each colony has its own money, and then that essentially will be a little bit of a mess, and the British will outlaw that again. Okay, next topic is French colonization. So the French were a little bit different than the British. The British brought in lots of settlers and created farm communities or merchant communities, big cities, right? And are always taking more and more land. Your French are going to send over a lot of young men, and they're going to be fur traders, fur trappers, and they tend to mix in with the Native Americans really well. They don't build as many big cities. They do have some big ones up in Canada like Quebec and Montreal, but they will blend in. Sometimes they'll adopt Native American ways. They will intermarry with Native American women and pretty much trade pretty peacefully, right? And do pretty well and work with the Indians on the fur trade. Now, one effect of the fur trade is going to be some increased Indian warfare. So we're going to start to see that the Native Americans will pick sides and maybe ally with the French or ally with the British. And as one set of Native Americans gets pushed west, then they want to take a neighboring tribe's land. And so we start to see a lot of increased warfare between the Native Americans because of those European settlers taking their land. So unfortunately, that's a bad side effect, right? The European settlers create competition between the Native Americans, whether it's for trade with the Europeans or just to kind of keep their land in their territory. Okay, a little bit about women. I know we've talked about women a lot. Just to know, especially in the North, women don't have a whole lot of rights. When they get married, their property becomes their husband's. They do have a dowry, but of course, when they're married, that becomes their husband's property. We'll see eventually the Germans will try to enforce where women can own property and then make their own wills and will that property to their children or whoever they would like. But that's going to come a little more slowly. And of course, women are a big part of the American colonies, and not just for having the kids and taking care of the home, but they do work hard and do supply a lot of those items that Americans use for trade. Okay, so middle colonies, they're the most diverse colonies. Your middle colonies are New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And these colonies are known as the bread colonies. You grow lots of grains there, wheat, corn, rye, barley, oats, and so hence the bread colonies. So good farming colonies, also good shipping as well. especially if you're in Philadelphia and New York, there will be a lot of trade and shipping too. Now, they're also very diverse in that you're going to have a lot of different nationalities settle there. You're going to have Welsh, you'll have English, Scots Irish, German, Jews, many more, and all different types of religions: Presbyterian, Catholic, Dutch Protestant, Jewish, Quaker, Quakers, of course, right? We can't forget Pennsylvania. The Middle Colonies are also known for being pretty friendly with the Native Americans, or at least Pennsylvania is very, very friendly with the Native Americans. Okay, that takes us to colonial settlement. Okay, so colonial settlement, one thing we want to keep in mind is that with the colonies, they're going to start on the eastern seaboard, right? They're on the ocean, right? Boston, New York, different ports, South Carolina and Charleston and South Carolina. And that's how they start. And then they slowly move west. So if you're looking at a map of colonial settlement, you'll see this westward movement, right? Now, one of the effects of westward movement is going to be competition for the land, right? So it'll be increased warfare with Native Americans as, you know, colonists move west into their land. So that'll be an effect. And then the other effect, we're going to start to see some class conflict, just like in Bacon's Rebellion, where your wealthy planters who have a lot of land and are in control of the legislatures are going to say, no, you can't move west, right? We don't want to interfere with the Indians or cause more problems. And those lower class settlers who want to take that land, who need that land, are going to start to rise up and conflict with kind of those wealthy planters. So we see that in Bacon's Rebellion, the Paxton Boys, and the Regulators. Okay, just real quickly on immigration, remember middle colonies and other colonies will have lots of immigration, right? And your immigrants are coming from Northwestern Europe, right? England, Germany, even a little bit from France as well. Okay, this is going to end our first segment, so I'm going to watch for the next video that will cover the second half of the test.